Hello, how you guys doing? James here. Well, I'm going to show you something recently that is kind of controversial. It really hits home for a lot of us, and maybe someone that we know. Um, this top, this topic is going to be about different cities who have a
Every year or so, I like to check these numbers. One thing that I've realized, unlike most stats, which should be done per capita or by rate, when you're counting the homeless, the total number is more alarming than the actual rate. Now, counting the homeless population is hard. It is hard to do a head count when you have people in your city that are sort of living off the grid, even though they're living within the grid. Organizations do what they can to get this head count. They call it a point-of-time survey. It's sort of an estimate. It isn't perfect, but it's what we have. There's another problem with this stat. Groups that have political agendas often exaggerate their numbers. The people that are trying to gain political points use overblown numbers. You also have organizations that are, let's say, trying to get money to help the homeless. They like to exaggerate their numbers a little bit too. Meanwhile, cities and real estate agents try and play down the numbers. So you just have to accept that it's somewhere in the middle and look at the surveys that are a little more realistic. For an example, the other day I saw a clip of a right-wing news channel, and their guest said that California had over 1 million people that were homeless. He only missed the mark by over 800,000. The left has their exaggerations too. Nobody in the news is a saint these days. Now, before we get going, I'm going to show you the rate of all the states right here. These are the highest rates for 2023. You have states on this list that have a very high rate because they don't have a whole lot of people. Vermont doesn't have many homeless people at all, but they have 43 for every 10,000 residents. Look at Alaska. Alaska has 31. So, yeah, that's why in this one it's a little more interesting to look at it from the total number. And that's what we're doing today. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Ohio. Ohio's homeless population, like many other states across the U.S., faces complex challenges that require thoughtful solutions. This is a very diverse homeless population, consisting of individuals and families from various backgrounds, including veterans, the mentally ill, and those struggling with addiction. Now, before we go any further, I understand that a large majority, about 75% of the people living on the streets, at least a couple of years ago they said this, were suffering from addiction and mental health issues. And in a way, you got to give them help. Chances are most of them won't ever get off the streets. What you really need to focus on, and most states do, are the people that just ended up on the streets because a few too many missed paychecks, things like that. Help them get back on their feet and have a normal life. Obviously, the state's urban centers such as Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus bear the brunt of the homeless situation, with shelters often overcrowded and resources stretched very thin. You know, you would think you would move to a warmer climate if you're living homeless. I mean, nobody wants to live on the streets of Cleveland, period. But during the winter, it's a little extra unhealthy. There are 10,655 Ohio residents living on the streets. Number 9, Arizona. Arizona is another state that's got a good-sized homeless population, even though they face their own geographic and climate conditions that would normally deter people from moving there. The heat and just the terrain of Arizona makes it rough to be homeless there. Not a lot of shade in this state, especially in the places where the focal point is, like Phoenix and Tucson. In Arizona, most studies find that after mental illness and addiction problems, joblessness and a rising cost of living in Arizona is what's got a lot of people on the streets. Currently, there are 10,979 people living on the streets of Arizona.
wow.
Number 8, Pennsylvania. The homeless population in Pennsylvania is a pressing issue that demands attention and action. Despite being one of the wealthiest states in the United States, Pennsylvania continues to grapple with a significant homeless population. Now, when I visit Pennsylvania, most of the time I stay in the rural areas. I have no need to go to Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or anything like that. So when I first read this, I'm all, that's an awful lot for such a nice state. Then I remembered, oh yeah, they do have Philadelphia, don't they? And Philadelphia, most of their homeless are in this one area called Kensington, and that place is scary. Half the people there look like they're, auditioning for a post-apocalyptic zombie movie. They want to be zombies, and they're really good at it. Pennsylvania, though, does have a lot of really good programs they're working on right now to get people off the streets, at least the people that can get off the streets. Those zombies down there in Kensington, I think a lot of them, there's really no hope. You'd wish there would be. I mean, they're human beings that need some help. It's just a lot of them seem to be very, very far gone, a little too far gone. Pennsylvania currently has a homeless population of 13,375.
we had to take out our old gas
3,000
heating
more,
and radiant heat.
3,500
That was a
more
really,
than
really
Ohio.
huge project.
Number 7, Oregon. Oregon, like many states in the U.S., face a significant challenge when it comes to homelessness. I honestly am surprised they're at number 7 and not like number 3 or number 2, something like that. I live not too far from Portland, Oregon, and yeah, we got a lot. They've moved them off the streets, so that's nice. There's no more tent cities in front of businesses, and they've moved them out of residential parks. These are steps in the right direction. They're getting these people to these safe rest zones, and they can get more help there and not affect the community, which is good. The city may return to some of its old glory, and these people are in a better place where they might be able to get better help. All the studies, though, about Portland and all of Oregon, our homeless situation, it has to do with affordable housing and a rising cost of living. Obviously, that's after addiction and mental illness. Those will always be the top 2, so I'll quit repeating that. Now, if you watch too much cable news, you've probably been told that Oregon, especially Portland, has about 100,000 homeless residents. Nowhere near. Right now, there are 14,655 homeless residents in Oregon.
Wow.
Number 6, Massachusetts. The homeless population in Massachusetts remains a pressing issue that warrants attention and action. Now, this is despite the state's reputation for being a very wealthy state and very progressive state. Homelessness still persists. They got many hurdles they got to get over. Their high cost of living, limited affordable housing options, and income inequality. This all feeds into their homeless situation. A majority of the homeless in Massachusetts you're going to find around the Boston metro area. The Boston metro area is one of the most expensive places to live in the United States, and so that's putting even more and more on the street after the big 2, addiction and mental illness. And it doesn't help, this is one of the coldest cities to live in during the winter, and they've got a lot of people on the streets. They've got to pour a lot of money into helping these people survive the winter every year. Living in a shelter is not free, even though it's free to them. Currently, there are 17,975 Massachusetts residents living on the street.
Whoa.
Number 5, Washington State. This is another one that surprised me. They don't have as many people living on the street that I thought. The homeless situation in Washington State has been a persistent and complex issue, garnering a whole bunch of attention from different news outlets. That's all people talk about, especially when they're talking about Seattle, is they're just talking about the homeless situation. You don't know that it's a beautiful city because that's all they talk about. This is my own observation. I know people from Seattle and Washington will argue with me, but I live in Portland, and around 2018, 19, 20, 21, it was really bad. That's when they started really setting up little street-side villages in front of businesses and apartment buildings, things like that. And then you go up to Seattle, and they had more homeless, but you didn't see as much of that. Most were sleeping underneath the overpasses and the bridges and things of that nature. Now, I'm sure someone's going to give me a hard time and say I'm talking bad about these people. No, I think these people are in a horrible situation, and I think every American has the right to have a safe place to put their head down at night. But I also think the people that run in businesses and have their livelihood involved in a business have the right to have the sidewalk clear for people to come into their businesses. It's a nasty circle of life thing. So these people need a place to stay. They stay in front of a business. Now the business goes out of business, and the state gets less tax dollars, and that means less tax dollars to help the homeless, and it's just this nasty circle. I think that's why a lot of these places now have these safe rest spots. We have some out by the airport in Oregon. Currently, Washington State has 22,923 people living on the streets.
Whoa.
Number 4, Texas. Now, this is where we get into the part of the list that they're just on here based on their population. The more people you have, the more likely you're going to have people living on the streets, or any situation. More people means more crime, more people means more poverty. But the homeless population in Texas presents multifaceted challenges that reflect both the state's economic diversity and the social disparities. Texas is home to a significant number of homeless individuals and families, with major urban centers like Houston, Dallas, and Austin grappling with this issue. I mean, Austin's pretty bad these days. I'm in Dallas currently as I'm recording this, and I've seen quite a few. Not nearly as much as I'd see in Portland or something like that, but they had a good number in downtown Dallas. I went to Dealey Plaza, and there's a whole bunch around there. I gave one guy, it was so hot. It's October, and it's like sweltering for Portland. It's like 92 degrees while I was there, and this one guy looked like he was just beat, and I had 2 bottles of water with me. I gave him one. In Portland, they would have asked if I had money, too. This guy just said thank you. I was like, oh, great. Anyway, the Lone Star State has 28,929 people living on the streets. Number 3, Florida. Florida's another state that has a lot of different problems that are basically challenges for the state dealing with the homeless. One of them is the weather. They have such nice weather most of the year. That's a lot of people will move there. I talked about earlier how you have different places like Cleveland where you have a whole bunch of people and they just suffer during the winter. Well, the ones that can head to places like California and Florida so they don't have to deal with that. I mean, it's bad enough when you're homeless, but when you're homeless and you're trying not to freeze to death, there's a little bit of a strange thing, though, in Florida. A lot, I would say a lot, but they have an odd percentage, or an odd amount, of homeless people living in their rural communities. You find that also up in West Virginia and Tennessee and Kentucky. Currently, Florida has 29,587 people living on the streets. Number 2, New York State. The homeless population of New York State is really a problem with New York City. That's where 99% of their homeless live, is in New York City. New York City is a wonderful city and it does great things for the state of New York, but sometimes the stats kind of affect the whole state. And when it comes to the homeless situation, yeah, it's a big factor in New York State. New York is home to a significant number of individuals experiencing homelessness. These individuals face a range of challenges, including inadequate access to shelter, healthcare, and economic opportunities. The reason behind their homelessness is, there's a lot of different reasons, but one of the main reasons, after the big ones, is affordable housing. They just don't have it anymore. They've tried all the things like rent control, but over time, that can only go so far. Currently, New York State has 91,271 people living on the streets. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There's a link for that down below. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Vermont. No, just kidding. California. The homeless population in California has long been a pressing and complex issue. This state, known for its wealth and prosperity, harbors one of the largest homeless populations in the United States, and a lot of them are in 2 different places, the Tenderloin in San Francisco and Skid Row in Los Angeles. Skid Row looks like it's something out of just some scary movie. It's gotten to the point down there where they're just trying to contain it. They don't really try and fix the situation in Skid Row. The police and different organizations kind of, just let it be the Wild West and hope it works itself out, I guess. One bad thing about Skid Row, it's part of Little Tokyo, which is a nice neighborhood in Southern California, in Los Angeles area, where people go and do touristy stuff. Well, Skid Row's actually part of it. Most people don't understand that, and if you look at the stats for Little Tokyo, you're oh my god, that place is a nightmare. But then you actually go to Little Tokyo, and it's a really nice place, nice part of Los Angeles. And I'm sure the people in Little Tokyo would love to section off that part of Skid Row and, just make it its own thing. Now, buckle up for this one. Currently, there are 162,548 people experiencing homelessness in California. Now, I've seen other studies from organizations with agendas that say it's 300,000 and 400,000. Like I said, I saw that one guy in a newscast said it was getting to or just over 1 million. 162,000 is a lot of people to be living on the streets in a country, not just a state. Alright, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out and have a great.
Is everything okay with Janet?
I'm on payroll.
Having a safe and affordable home is essential for all Americans to thrive. For decades, low-income families have struggled to access affordable rental homes. However, this issue has now become a significant problem for the middle class as well. Millions of middle-income earners are unable to afford rent in major U.S. cities due to the steep rise in prices since the pandemic. Without significant pay increases or government assistance, these middle-class households are being excluded from the typical middle-class neighborhoods. This exclusion triggers a chain reaction that leads to systemic poverty and lingering inequality. In other words, housing costs are suffocating the middle class. We have compiled several statistics and facts that demonstrate this trend. However, before we move on, we kindly request that you support our work and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our upcoming videos. The American dream used to entail getting married, settling down, purchasing a home, and growing old. However, in today's world, this concept looks vastly different. Buying a home is no longer an affordable option for everyone. multiple financial burdens have emerged for everyday Americans, such as increased debt, soaring housing costs, and rampant inflation. These factors have contributed to the decline in homeownership and the shift towards renting. Currently, almost 43 million families live in rented apartments in America, which is the highest level in history. The surge in the number of middle-class renters has been staggering. In the past 5 years, the number of households making from $56,000 to $100,000 a year that decided to rent increased by 82%, according to a recent report from the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University. At the same time, rental vacancy rates are lower than they've been since 1985, and once renters do find housing, they have to pay the price. The typical home now costs about $80,000 more than it did just 2 years ago, and the average rent in the U.S. is over $1,000 more expensive than it was in 2020. Rents are now climbing an average of 3.5% annually, while middle-class renters' incomes have declined 9% over the past decade. In an interview with ABC, salesman Robert Gary from Columbus, Ohio, said he always lived a comfortable middle-class life until the pandemic changed everything. Now Gary is seeing his pay rise fail in comparison to the rise in cost of living. "I'm living paycheck to paycheck and barely making it," he said. "I get a raise. They raise the prices to take my raise away." According to Gary, in December, his landlord informed him that his rent would increase from $1,710 a month to $1,950 a month starting January 2023. A $240 increase in a month was just insane stress, Gary said. "No one cares anymore. Companies are out there taking as much as they can get." When asked if he could afford it, the renter lamented, "No, not with the price of everything else right now. I mean, that's half my income." The only things he could find cheaper than this were in neighborhoods that he wouldn't feel safe in. The pace at which Gary was forced out of his middle-class lifestyle was extremely shocking to him. "It is unlike anything I have seen in my 60 years in America," he emphasized, adding that he now has to move out and stay with a friend until he can find a place he can afford. Unfortunately, similar situations are increasingly common for middle-income renters. In fact, the managing director of the Joint Center of Housing Studies, JCHS, Chris Herbert, argues that in 2023, rental housing in America is a tale of two markets. While higher-income renters are finding a healthier supply of housing choices, too many families earning less than $100,000 per year are having to make trade-offs between putting a roof over their heads and food on the table. In most metropolitan areas across the country, the American middle class has been spending far more on housing than they can afford, researchers found. A study highlights that 21.2% of middle-class homeowners and 46.3% of middle-class renters in the United States are either moderately or severely burdened by housing costs, defined as spending more than 30% or more than 50% of their income on housing, respectively. The property price boom of the past few years has pushed 70% of homes out of reach of first home buyers on middle incomes, especially now at the highest interest rates in over a decade. Those able to buy are having to save for an extra year to have a 20% deposit, the data revealed. Meanwhile, rents are consuming progressively larger shares of income. In Boston, for example, the median rent hit $2,680 in February, up 24% from 3 years ago. A household would need to earn at least $117,000 annually to afford this, based on the standard definition of affordability, in which one should pay no more than 30% of income for housing. Consider that in Boston, an elementary school teacher makes approximately $68,000 a year, and a registered nurse $73,000, and you get the picture that the middle class is getting squeezed. Median rents in Los Angeles are currently at $3,000, while in Washington, they are $2,600 per month. The demand for rental housing is high due to an exploding population of millennials burdened with student loans and low-paying jobs, baby boomer retirees downsizing to apartments, former homeowners exiting foreclosure, and millions of would-be homeowners who cannot access mortgages in the tight credit market. Everyone wants the same type of location, which includes cities, transit-friendly suburbs, and town centers that are walkable and close to jobs. However, the pace of new residential construction has been insufficient to make up for years of virtual standstill. In many cities, demand is so high that there are enough high-income renters to support prices that are out of reach for the middle class, lower-wage employees, and seniors. This supply and demand imbalance is expected to keep rents high for the foreseeable future. We are currently in a rental affordability crisis. 15 years ago, more than 2/3 of people who rented an apartment or a single-family home in the U.S. earned less than $30,000 a year. However, beginning in 2010, the share of middle-class renters surged as the country started to heal from the 2008 housing bust. This shift came as the economy drove up home prices to new record highs, straining family budgets across the country. Rents, too, have been rising since the Great Recession, and in coastal and hot cities like Denver and Austin, these increases have put even rentals out of reach for most of the middle class. In 2022, the Capitol required to sign a lease on an average price $3,500 per month apartment in San Francisco often exceeds $12,000 due to requirements for first and last month's rent, security deposits, and a broker fee. In contrast, since 2010, there has been a significant increase in home building that could make up for the time when it virtually stopped all over the nation. We didn't build anything in the recession that's still biting us today, said Andre Bueno, the founder of Los Angeles-based real estate investment firm Bueno Group. If you are in the missing middle, you are incredibly out of luck. The missing middle represents those who aren't rich enough to navigate the current housing market without getting burned, and at the same time aren't poor enough to qualify for government assistance on housing. It's no wonder that U.S. cities are increasingly home to high rollers who can pay high rents or down payments and lower income people who qualify for subsidized housing, while middle income earners are being priced out of middle income neighborhoods. Every passing year makes it harder for middle class renters who cannot qualify for subsidized housing to find affordable apartments on the market. Renters need to earn $21.21 per hour to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment in the U.S., according to the National Low-Income Housing Council, significantly more than the average national hourly wage of $16.38. This is why 51% of renters in the middle class are unable to afford a place to live in most U.S. cities. The past few years have seen the disappearance of the savings that were once associated with the middle class, as wage growth has stagnated. This not only makes it difficult for people to remain in the middle class, but also makes it impossible to come up with the high sums required to rent or buy city apartments. According to Michael Dickerson, a housing expert at the University of Texas, the affordable housing crisis is not just for the very poor, but also for those with good jobs who are not poor enough to qualify for subsidized housing, and not rich enough to pay the rising housing prices. For instance, a family making $100,000 a year cannot afford to buy a house in most U.S. cities. Analysis at the University of Texas estimate that to comfortably raise a middle-class family, one needs to make around $300,000 a year. Due to rising cost of gasoline, food, housing, travel, tuition, and healthcare, the middle-class lifestyle is becoming increasingly difficult to achieve. Even though it is statistically possible to raise a family with less income, it won't be easy if one's goal is to save for retirement, save for their child's education, own a home, and retire at a reasonable age. Managing everyday expenses has become increasingly challenging for many Americans, especially those with lower incomes. Spending too much on rent can have far-reaching implications that go beyond the end of the month stress. According to a study by Apartment List, households across the U.S. spend 41% less on food and 71% less on healthcare due to the cost burden of housing. Already, approximately 51 million households do not earn enough to afford a monthly budget that includes housing, food, childcare, healthcare, transportation, and a cell phone. The majority of people are struggling with housing, according to Fannie Mae Maury Family Research head Kim Betancourt, who notes that there is not enough affordable housing for the people who need it. This creates a chain reaction where a middle-class person occupies an apartment that a lower-income person might have occupied, and so on. If there are not enough cheaper options, it leads to systemic poverty and an increasingly unequal America where only those at the very top of the economic chain can own their own homes and build equity through properties while the middle class is hollowed out. This is not just a housing and rental crisis, but a reflection of the crumbling foundations of a broken society and
Switch to Google Fi Wireless and get our premium unlimited phone plan, Unlimited Plus. Keep your whole family.
Most of you are probably already thinking of cities in California, and, well, you'd be right. Currently, there are just under 600,000 homeless people in the U.S., according to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. There are several ways to make this list, with one being the most amount of homeless people per capita. The problem with that is you'd end up with a list of small towns that no one has ever heard of. So, for this list, we will go with raw numbers. Which then brings us to the New York versus Los Angeles debate. New York City actually has more homeless people, but fewer unsheltered homeless people. Unsheltered homeless means they are living on the streets, in tents, or in the subway. Sheltered homeless are people who may be considered homeless, but are staying on a friend's couch or in a hotel. Getting an accurate picture is tough since homelessness can be defined in so many ways, so here is our best list based on the city's reported numbers on unsheltered homeless people. Starting with number 10. This one may surprise you. New York City. While some stats will put New York City at number 1, thanks to the right to shelter law, there are actually only around 2,500 unsheltered homeless in New York. Of the roughly 80,000 homeless in New York City, only 5% live in public spaces, compared to Los Angeles, in which 70% of theirs live in public spaces. The number of unsheltered homeless in New York actually takes this city off this list altogether, but we had to include it because it's such an anomaly. Though New York isn't the ideal climate with harsh winters and hot, humid summers, unaffordable housing and limited housing pave the way for the homeless crisis. New Yorkers are generous with giving food and money to those in need, and their right to shelter law, which, although hasn't solved the underlying problem, at least helped 95% remain sheltered. Number 9 is Philadelphia, with approximately 4,500 unsheltered homeless people. Another city that doesn't have a climate that would be welcoming to the outdoors. About 18% of Philly's homeless population is unsheltered, and the city of brotherly love has done a lot to house as many as they can. Studies show that many hesitate to go to a shelter despite there being beds available for fear of personal safety, loss of dignity, and disruption of relationships and routines. Obviously, the stigma against those who are homeless make getting help a challenge as well. Many assume that people are homeless because of poor choices, while not considering their other circumstances like mental health issues. Number 8 is Washington, D.C., with approximately 4,900 unsheltered homeless people. This is the second to last city that we'll see with a less than hospitable climate for those living in the elements. Income inequality is a big factor in D.C. Sadly, the number of homeless people has increased by 11.6% since 2022. This year also saw a rise in younger people being unhoused, as well as a higher rate of substance abuse. Due to the increase, lawmakers are trying to increase the budget to help the rising numbers. Sadly, this uptick came after a steady decline. High housing costs and racial disparities also account for the crisis, as 83% of all those who are homeless are black, despite only making up 45% of the population. It's hard not to take action in such a tourist-heavy city that represents our nation as the capital city. Number 7 is Las Vegas, where an estimated 5,645 people were either homeless or living in shelters, with a staggering 14,000 people experiencing homelessness at least once in the last year. Sin City may be a hotspot for tourists, but it's hard to walk down the streets without being confronted by the homeless crisis. With gambling and substance abuse at every corner, it's easy to see how people could end up without a home. Couple that with the cost of housing, aging out of the foster system, and a lack of address to put on a job application, and you can see why there is a crisis. Sadly for Las Vegas, the homeless youth are most vulnerable to sex trafficking and prostitution. Some turn to prostitution to make ends meet, while others fall victim to predators who are trying to capitalize off of the city's sinful reputation. Number 6 takes us out to California, where the majority of this list will sit. San Jose, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, has over 6,000 homeless residents. They also represent one of the youngest homeless populations. The unhoused is jarring for anyone who is living, working, or visiting San Jose. Unfortunately for San Jose, the numbers are on the rise. Students at San Jose University have been well aware of the rising crisis and have been rallying for school administrators to provide relief in terms of beds and emergency funds. A staggering 11% of students in San Jose have self-reported as being homeless at least one day in the past year. The city has partnered with a local organization to build new apartments for young people, but it will not be finished until at least 2024. High cost of living can take a toll on young people, particularly those who grew up in San Jose but can't afford to actually live there.
Every part of you is connected, so the way you care for your health should be too. Whether you need primary care, mental health support, or care for chronic conditions? Teladoc Health brings it all together to keep all of you healthy. Get started today.
Actually live there. Number 5 is Phoenix, Arizona. There's no doubt people may be attracted by the weather. If you have to live in the elements, then Phoenix at least has plenty of sun. There are about 6,000 homeless people in Phoenix, and like many cities, housing costs, substance abuse, and mental illness are all factors. Sadly, Phoenix is in a Titanic lifeboat situation with less than half the amount of shelter beds needed to provide shelter for all their homeless population. Many homeless encampments are said to be unsafe, but many residents still refuse to move into a shelter, citing strict curfews, rules, and a no-tolerance policy for drug use, which is sadly how many homeless residents in Phoenix cope with the pain. Many neighborhoods have sued the government to remove the ever-sprawling camps of tents that have infiltrated local streets, leaving behind a lake of trash, needles, and crime. It's a shame that there isn't access to better mental health care for those who seek treatment, but this seems to be a nationwide issue among the unhoused. Number 4 is San Diego with 10,200. With all around the perfect climate, it's no wonder there are 2 cities in Southern California that make this list. The homeless population in San Diego increased by 32% since 2022 and seems to be still growing. This may come to a screeching halt as the San Diego City Council is set to vote on a proposed camping ban that will try to break up tent encampments that officials say threaten public health and safety. Residents of San Diego seem divided on the issue, though it seems like those that are against the ban aren't directly affected. Those that live in wealthy suburbs don't have to walk past hundreds of tents to get around the corner. City officials receive an average of 2,200 citizen complaints each month about the encampments, and they have admitted that they've been unable to keep up with quality of life expectations. Number 3 is San Francisco with 38,000. The only surprise here is that it isn't number 1, but when you consider that they have nearly 40,000 homeless people with a population of only 815,201, then that puts it into perspective. New York has double the homeless but 10 times the population. Tents, homeless, needles, and open defecation have almost become synonymous with San Francisco. San Francisco has a housing crisis with a mix of both unaffordable housing and a limited amount of housing. The government has also been very friendly to the needs of the unhoused, which has yielded both praise and criticism. Famous for their syringe access service, drug users in San Francisco are given clean needles and drug use paraphernalia in order to reduce the spread of HIV and AIDS. Needless to say, this controversial policy has been brought under fire. Some of its harshest critics are former drug users themselves, who said that San Francisco's syringe policy has kept addicts in a state of bondage. The homeless crisis in San Francisco has gotten so bad that it's impacting their tourism industry. A medical group that held conventions in San Francisco since the 1980s had pulled out their $40 million investment for fear that the city streets just weren't safe for its participants.
$40 million.
This has been a growing concern for San Francisco officials who have been overwhelmed. Many people cite the city's policies as the cause for the crisis, whereas New York has seemed to do a much better job providing shelter and safety. Number 2 is Seattle with about 40,000. Though the actual number varies dramatically, this estimate is on the higher end, landing Seattle in the number 2 position. This one is shocking given the climate. Though not as cold as Boston or New York, the city is famous for its rain. Seattle has become more transparent about its homeless problem and has enacted several policies to help mitigate the rising cases of homelessness. This included providing 2,000 permanent to semi-permanent housing units that are affordable thanks to the new permit regulations. In 2015, the then mayor declared a state of emergency for homelessness. This emergency was also exacerbated by the pandemic, but it isn't only a new phenomenon. Seattle has a history of race-based zoning that has led to gaps in generational wealth that are disproportionately felt by Black and American Indian/Alaska Native communities who disproportionately represent the homeless population. Before we get to number 1, here are a few other cities that are also facing a homelessness crisis, although as smaller cities, they had numbers too small to make the list. Nashville and Salt Lake City are no strangers to this crisis. Nashville, in particular, sees most of its homeless in the downtown area, where thousands of tourists visit each day and often give money or food to those begging on the streets. Compassionate as that may be, it does little to discourage panhandling. Honolulu is another city facing a crisis. This tourist-heavy city with the highest housing costs in the nation has left its Hawaiian natives in the dust as property values have priced the locals out of paradise. Though this list focuses on America, the number one city in the world for homelessness is Manila, Philippines, where there are 1.2 million homeless children alone. Moscow, Mexico City, Mumbai, and Jakarta come in just after. Number one for our list is Los Angeles, with an estimated range of 47,900 to 63,700 unhoused individuals, where a staggering 70% are unsheltered. This by far makes the City of Angels the top spot on this list. It's rumored that there are no streets or underpasses left in Los Angeles that don't have a tent encampment on it, and sadly this is no exaggeration. City officials are being pushed to their limits as angry voters demand change. California city mayors have long since been accused of being too tolerant, to the point where they are attracting unhoused people to come and set up camp in LA. The most famous encampment in LA is Skid Row. Many documentaries have been made to chronicle life there. Skid Row contains the largest stable population of homeless people, ranging from 9,200 to 15,000 fairly permanent residents. Skid Row crimes make up 59% of all crime in downtown Los Angeles. There is an epidemic of substance abuse and mental health issues on Skid Row. This falls in sharp contrast with some of the nation's wealthiest neighborhoods, like Beverly Hills or Bel Air. Have you seen an increase of homelessness in your area? What are local residents doing to make a difference? Like and subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments below what community action can be taken to help curb this crisis.
Amid global market volatility, stock market losses, and rising inflation have left investors with few options. Investing in real estate debt on ground floor provides a low-risk way to earn high yields and earn consistent double-digit cash returns.
And I told her it's the best thing to do. You stay up there, you know, because she's on a pension and everything. Because I live in those kind of low-income apartments and stuff. I was blessed to have something like that, because the rent you need to make that's about right here in Columbus.
Hey, Bulls and Bears, we're back. Nice to see you. It is Tuesday, August 29th, 2023. Back with another dose of economic reality. We've got some scary, in my opinion, some scary information to go over today, and some charts that just look bizarre, bonkers. I mean, pick your word. We're going to look at it here in just a minute. We're also going to talk about the dollar. Something really strange, something really weird has been happening to the dollar, something that a lot of people did not expect. And yes, my last video I had a pretty bad sunburn. It's mostly gone by now. And thank you. A couple of you felt sorry for me, I think, and you gave me a tip. I appreciate it. First of all, thank you to Josh Martin, 7326. He told me to go buy myself some Ben & Jerry's ice cream. If it's not $8, yeah, and I think Ben & Jerry's, they don't even sell gallons. Isn't it like a little pint or a quart for like $7 sometimes? So thank you, Josh. I appreciate that. Also, thank you once again to Silver Dragon 7160. Appreciate the kind tip and support, and actually the words of encouragement. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. All right, so let's get into it. The economic collapse continues, and I think when you see this next bit of information, this next visual, it's a chart. I'm going to bring it up here. This is the interest that we're paying, the federal interest being paid here on the national debt. And let me move myself up here out of the way of the chart here, so you can see this goes back all the way to like 1940, late 1940s, and this is the interest in billions of dollars that we are paying. And if we look to the right edge here, ever since about late 2020, we're parabolic, folks. We're nearly straight up and down on this. The federal government current expenditures, just interest alone. And because this is in billions of dollars, if you look to the right here, to the left side, where it says 1,000, that actually is $1 trillion. Right? So we're right about approaching actually $1 trillion annually. This is annual expenditures just on interest alone. Right? So now we've got debt accumulating, increasing at the fastest pace ever, but the interest on the debt increasing also, but not just because the debt's increasing the fastest, because the interest rate is higher. And this is beginning to look like Venezuela, Zimbabwe type of stuff here to me. I mean, I don't think we really got into the deep woods yet, if you know what I mean, or the deep weeds. So please let me know how this ends. How do you think this ends? But the other information I want to bring up here is something that might be pretty surprising to a lot of people. We're looking at a chart here of the US dollar. This is a 1-month chart. Look at the strength here just over the past month. People were thinking with the BRICS nations coming out announcing the expansion of the coalition of countries that are trading outside of the dollar. People thought that would crash the dollar. People, thought that would send precious metals skyrocketing. But I said right here in this channel, I don't think they're going to introduce a new 100% gold-backed currency. And I was correct. The announcement was the expansion of the BRICS countries that are going to be trading outside of the dollar. And I don't want to downplay that. I think that's very significant news. But look at the strength of the dollar. Because of the higher interest rates, the dollar is still very, very strong. Now, we know, and you should know anyways, that the dollar is being compared. When we look at the strength of the dollar, it's being compared to other fiat currencies around the world, which hardly any of them are backed by gold. The ones that are backed by gold are just fractionally backed by gold. A very minuscule amount. Some countries have, brought gold back into their currency system, but still 99.999 repeating is just fiat money, just like the U.S. dollar. But compared to those other currencies, pretty strong here if you just look over the past month. Let's expand out to a year. Right, so you can see the trend is down, but just over the past month, it has strengthened ever since the beginning of July there, going on 2 months now. So pretty interesting, and with the higher interest rates, the Fed being in dollar protection mode, this is really not too much of a shocker. I think to some people it may be shocking, but it's not too much of a shocker. If you park your money right now, you get a 5% return. I've got a 5% return in my 401k right now. It's kind of nice just to sit back and actually collect interest, right? The first time that's happened to this level in a very, very long time, and we haven't seen interest rates this high. We haven't seen it this high since right before the financial crisis, before they started cutting, right? So August 2007, right about where we're at right now. And of course they started cutting after that. So many people are predicting that cuts are right around the corner for the central bank here in the U.S. And if you look back at previous rate hikes, it didn't last long before they had to cut, right? You see up and down, up and down, up and down. And the increases usually are always lower than the previous highs as far as how high they were able to raise interest rates, right? So we see the big spike in the early 80s, down and went up again in the 90s, but all lower than the previous highs. But now something different this time because of the massive cost of living inflation and the fight against it. We're now matching where we were prior to the financial crisis, folks. That's something else that's never happened. All previous hiking cycles have ended up where they had to cut before getting back to where the rates were as far as the previous highs go. So this is pretty significant, folks. We're seeing a lot of things that are very, very unusual and just a lot different than what we've seen before. We've never seen the interest on the national debt go straight up and down like this. Again, please let me know how this ends. Are we headed for something very, very soon? I've always said the second half of 2023, I think, is looking like it's going to be a lot of fireworks popping off here, and we're almost done with the end of August, so we have 4 months to go approximately. And what's going to happen, please let me know down below. In some recent reports, we talked about how they're keeping the housing market propped up. We've got Zillow coming out with 1% mortgages. We've got Zillow also predicting that home prices are going to rise by over 6% next year, probably on the back of their 1% mortgage, right? So crazy times. They're doing a lot of things to keep this housing bubble propped up. This is not good. We want to see the cost of living come down. When people get buried under this much debt, typically in the past, throughout history, we've seen deflationary corrections and deflationary recessions. Now we're seeing an inflationary economic downturn. Of course, they're not going to call it a recession yet because they can just expand people's credit card limits enough to keep them spending, and that gets chalked up as GDP, so therefore technically there's not a recession. But folks, this doesn't end well. The debt can't go on forever. Something has got to break, and I think very, very soon. But let's get into some other information here. Now, instead of looking at the dollar compared to other fiat currencies, known as the dollar index, take a look at the purchasing power of the dollar. And this goes up to 2020. Obviously, it's gotten worse since 2020, but you get the point here. This goes all the way back to prior to 1920. And here's what you see right here. The Federal Reserve Act creates a central bank, so they're talking about 1913 here, with the ability to manage the country's money supply. And boom, you see a crash. You see a crash in the purchasing power of the dollar shortly after that.
We look at this thing, we're saying there's 5 rights they're establishing under the caveat or under the category of the right to reproduct.
The dollar shortly after that. Just a coincidence, though. It wasn't their doing at all, right? U.S. President Roosevelt criminalizes the possession of gold. How crazy is that? They criminalized gold. You couldn't own gold. You were a criminal if you owned gold.
Are you serious?
That still blows my mind nowadays, but the way the world's looking right now, it wouldn't really surprise me if they did something like that again. To push everyone into the digital currency. Bretton Woods in the early 1940s establishes the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. 1971, the gold standard is abandoned, and look, another huge downslide after we completely detached from gold. Again, a coincidence? I don't think so. You don't think so. Nobody thinks so that I know of. Also, in 2020, the U.S. money supply grew by 3.8 trillion, equal to 20% of all dollars ever created. Ever. Now, the central bank had their little meeting down in Jackson Hole, and there they talked about how the road to fight inflation is a long road, and it's going to be a tough fight or a tough travel. But they're not gonna make it down the road. They're not gonna be able to stop this inflation. They're doing it all wrong. We need to bring more production back, and we need to limit the number of dollars that can be thrown at the problem. Remember, the more dollars that are thrown at the problem to help it, the worse it gets. I know that seems counterintuitive, but when you have a bunch of people spending money, it's not just people spending money. I'm not just talking about stimulus checks. When you have a bunch of money creation and spending in general, it creates an inflationary environment, right? So we need less money creation, more production. We need to stop punishing people for working. And there's people out here making, $30-something an hour, still struggling to get by. I'm going to bring up a video here. Let's listen to someone making about, I believe it was $35 an hour, and how they're simply struggling, and they have to eat bread and I think peanut butter. Take a listen. Take a listen to this person.
I'm having a day, or I'm having a life. I don't know, man. I just don't know what to do anymore. I'm sitting outside work, crying my eyes out in my vehicle, because I can't function anymore. Financially, I don't understand anymore. I don't understand how I make $34 an hour, and I can't function. I can't pay my bills. I can't even literally keep gas on my car to get to work 3 days a week, because I can't afford it. Like, I get paid, and it goes to car, mortgage, a couple little bills, and then maybe $80 in food.
I wonder how many people feel like this, but when you look at them, and when you speak with them, they're smiling and they're basically just faking it, but this is how they feel on the inside. I mean, with the levels of debt, it's got to be, I think most of the population may be feeling like this. Hopefully they're not all breaking down crying like this, but how many people feel like this?
For the week. And I literally only buy groceries on my daughter's home now. On the weeks that she goes with her dad, which is Monday to Monday, what I've started doing is I buy a loaf of rye bread, and I work really hard to keep that one loaf of rye bread lasting me the whole week, and I eat peanut butter, so I'll eat peanut butter toast whenever I'm hungry. And it's been fine. It's been working just fine.
She's eating peanut butter and bread, pretty much. That's it. Making $34-something an hour. Whoa.
I'm good with that. That's fine. But last week, I guess I was a little extra hungry a couple days, so I had toast in the morning and toast in the evening, which that's not in my budget. So I ran out of bread on like the Thursday, or even the Friday, I don't know. Either way, at 47, I had to see if my mother could buy me a loaf of bread so that I could eat for the weekend before my daughter got home.
Fast forwarding a little bit here.
Crawl space in my house right now literally has like 8 inches of water in it, and it has for months, and it's like filled with mold. And so all I've been doing for the last few days is going online trying to figure out how I can get a septic pump. And then if I can actually sell enough stuff to afford one, then I have to learn how to install it.
People can't afford the repairs on their homes. Point is, I don't want to play this whole video. It's just too sad for me to watch somebody talk about this. But the point is, a lot of people are house poor, and you're going to see a lot of homeowners pretty soon, I think, in this situation where the repairs start adding up, everything else, the cost of everything starts adding up, and people are going to be forced to sell their homes. We're going to ultimately see inventory in the housing market increase. I don't think there's going to be a housing crash, but things are going to start turning and taking a turn, I think, for the worst. What else is happening in the financial world here? Well, some big news here. Rite Aid filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. That's a reorganization. And this is largely stemming from a lawsuit that they overfilled prescriptions for painkillers, I believe opioids. But also you have a lot of five-finger discount stuff going on there. Pretty much all the retailers, brick and mortar retailers, are suffering with all of the loss of items from their store. And it's hurting their profits, and what's that going to lead to? More layoffs. This is out of Forbes. Sinking profits means companies are going to be doing more layoffs. Some people think that a company has to start losing money before they start laying people off. No, all they have to do is see their profits decrease. In other words, they're still making money, they're just not making as much as they did previously. So that sends out the red flag, and what do? They start cost cutting, including doing those layoffs. Right, so obviously with the profits plunging and dropping, do you think the layoff picture is going to get better or worse? I mean, obviously it's going to get worse, right? But if you believe Zillow, the economy is resilient. Home prices are going to go up 6% next year. Everything's fine. All these home buyers are out there just with their big down payments, even though they've got to offer a 1% down payment to get people to buy a home. Speaking of buying homes, take a look at this here. 2021, $500,000 house with a 3% interest rate, $2,108 a month. 2023, the same house, 7% interest rate, $3,327 monthly payment. And it's actually worse than this because this assumes a 20% down payment. Most people are not coming in with a 20% down payment. Of course, that's why you have to have Zillow out there with a 1% down payment program. And other lenders also, it's not just Zillow. Right, folks, they want to extend this economic illusion. They want to push it past the end of 2024, in my opinion. Will they be able to keep things propped up, keep the bubbles inflated until then? Or are consumers, like the person we just heard from a few minutes ago, are the consumers just going to be too maxed out on their credit cards, hitting their credit card ceiling before the end of 2024? I mean, I think it's got to happen. It's got to break before 2024. And maybe we'll...
Roller coaster prices, supply chain glitches, political unease. Aon has expert points of...
I'm going to stop it right here. It's rough out here. And if you can, that's why it's good to literally stay together or have a roommate. That's how it's going to make it if you're going to, unless you can afford getting some subsidized housing. That's the best way most people want to go. But right now, you see a woman that's making $34 an hour struggling. Like, God, dog, that's crazy, man. Like, whatever city she living in, it's rough. So, but this would lead into why it's so much homelessness. And it's not just like people on drugs and alcohol. You see that there's people like herself who are working. And I was watching a video. It was a woman in Arizona was struggling trying to make it by, and the rent's like $2,400 out there. Like, God, dog, man, just $2,400, and just like it was like a ridiculous $250 for an application fee, and yeah, that's Phoenix, Arizona. So it's rough out here, man. So people need to work things out, because this, even he was saying that even for someone making $100,000 is struggling, and they're struggling. You go to a state like California and Washington, man, you're struggling. The big cities like San Francisco and LA, oh my God, you really have to make almost $500,000 just to live out there, to live somewhat comfortable. And that's just probably gonna be middle class pretty soon. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. Yeah, now you see what the economy go through, but I'm like him. I don't see it gonna get better in the next year if the housing market's like this. I could be wrong, and like you said, Zillow is pulling out. And he's not the only one that said this. There's a couple other people that's like, wait a minute, you kind of misleading people about what the housing market gonna be like. But anyway, you save up. It's time to pinch pennies and save up. And really, you can move into a smaller city or town and save you some money. Your best bet, you have relatives that go back to the small towns, and move in with somebody, because it's gonna get rough out here in another year or so. And the way the economy is right now, with the strikes and jobs, and they don't want to pay, and you have to worry about this AI and all this other crazy mess that these companies trying to cut. So, but yeah, I hope this was some very volatile information. But yeah, he made a good point. And the cities, and you see those cities, wow. And that's just the bigger cities. That ain't including the smaller cities. That's home, because you got a lot of small towns and small cities too that have a high population of homeless too. So that this government needs to do a whole lot better. Stop sending money out to the doggone country on some meaningless wars, and take care of its poor and its working class people. So I hope that, hope maybe the next administration might do a lot better job. What do you think? But anyway, alright then, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed this video. Till next time, you take care, be blessed, and hopefully save your money up, and hope you'll be able to weather the storm out to next year and beyond. Take care.